The scandal had started with a phone call from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Richard had built Thomson Corporation from nothing, growing it into a billion-dollar investment firm over 15 years. He had been proud of his success, proud of the jobs he created, proud of the returns he delivered to his clients. What he had not known was that his chief financial officer had been running an elaborate fraud scheme, cooking the books and creating fake accounts to hide massive losses. By the time federal investigators finished their work, Thomson Corporation was exposed as a house of cards. Richard had not known about the fraud, but ignorance was not a defense. He was the CEO. He was responsible. The company collapsed in a matter of days. Investors lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Employees lost their jobs and their retirement savings. The media painted Richard as a villain, a greedy billionaire who had stolen from hardworking people. The lawsuits came next. Civil suits, criminal investigations, angry investors who wanted blood. Richard's lawyers told him he might avoid prison, but he would lose everything else. They were right. The bankruptcy court took his houses, his cars, his art collection, his wife's jewelry. His wife Laura had left him before the bankruptcy was final, taking nothing but her clothes and a one-way ticket to her sister's house in California. She had not said goodbye to Sophie. Richard had tried to find work, but his name was poison. No company would hire him. No investor would meet with him. Friends he had known for decades stopped returning his calls. The money ran out quickly. First they stayed with Richard's brother in Boulder, but that relationship soured after 2 months. Then a series of cheap motels, each one worse than the last, as Richard's savings dwindled to nothing. Now they were here, at the Sunset Motel on the edge of Denver, where the rooms smelled like cigarette smoke and mildew, where the parking lot was cracked and full of weeds, where the other residents were people who had also fallen through the cracks of society. Richard had $300 left in his bank account. He had applied to 42 jobs in the past month and received 42 rejections. Sophie had stopped asking about her mother. She had stopped asking about her toys and her friends and her school. She had accepted this new life with the heartbreaking resilience of children who have no other choice. But she still asked for small things. A coloring book. A happy meal. An ice cream cone on a hot day. Richard walked to the window and looked out at the convenience store across the street. He could see the bright lights of the freezer section through the front windows. He counted the money in his pocket again. $23. The motel room was $25 per night. If he spent money on ice cream, they would be homeless by morning. Daddy. Sophie's voice was small behind him. Did you forget about the ice cream? He turned and looked at his daughter. She was wearing a donated dress that was too big for her, her thin arms sticking out like twigs. She had lost weight over the past few months. They both had. The food bank provided some meals, but not enough, and Richard often gave Sophie his portion so she could have more. No, sweetheart, I didn't forget, he said. Let's go get you that ice cream. He did not know what they would do tomorrow. He did not know where they would sleep or how they would eat. But he could not watch his daughter suffer through another day without doing something, anything, to make her smile. He took her hand and they walked out of the motel room into the brutal Denver heat. The convenience store was blinding bright after the dimness of the motel room. Richard held Sophie's hand tightly as they walked past the aisles of chips and candy that they could not afford. The freezer section was at the back of the store, humming with cold air that felt like heaven against their sweaty skin. Sophie pressed her face against the freezer glass, staring at the rows of ice cream bars and popsicles with the intensity of someone studying precious gems. Can I have the strawberry one? She asked. Please. Richard checked the price. $2.49. He pulled the $23 from his pocket and counted it again, as if the numbers might somehow change. If he bought the ice cream, they would have $20.51. Not enough for the motel room. They would be evicted tonight. Sophie, honey, maybe we should wait until tomorrow, he started to say. But Daddy, you promised. Her lower lip began to tremble. You said we could get ice cream. You promised. He had promised. He had looked his 7-year-old daughter in her trusting eyes and promised her something he could not deliver. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. He was a man who had once controlled hundreds of millions of dollars, who had made decisions that affected thousands of people's lives, who had been interviewed on financial news shows and invited to speak at business conferences. Now he could not keep a simple promise to buy his child a frozen treat. Sophie's trembling turned into tears. She tried to hide them, turning away and wiping her face with her too big dress, but her small shoulders shook with suppressed sobs. Other customers in the store glanced over with expressions ranging from pity to annoyance. Richard felt his own eyes burning. He put the money back in his pocket and put his hand on Sophie's shoulder. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Excuse me." A voice behind them, gentle but firm. Richard turned to see a black woman in her 50s wearing a teal cleaning uniform with Sunset Motel embroidered on the pocket. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. "I couldn't help but overhear. Would it be all right if I bought the little one an ice cream?" Richard felt his face flush with shame. "No, thank you. We're fine." "Daddy, please," Sophie whispered. The woman smiled at Sophie, ignoring Richard's protest. "What flavor were you wanting, honey?" "Strawberry," Sophie said quietly. The woman opened the freezer and pulled out a strawberry ice cream bar. Then she grabbed a chocolate one and a vanilla one. "These are my favorites," she said to Sophie. "Why don't you pick which one you like best, and I'll take the other two home for my grandkids?" Sophie looked up at Richard with desperate hope in her eyes. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to say they did not need charity, that they could take care of themselves. But that would be a lie, and his daughter deserved better than his pride. "That's very kind of you," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The woman took all 3 ice cream bars to the counter and paid for them. She handed the strawberry one to Sophie, who clutched it like treasure. "Thank you," Sophie said. "Thank you so much." "You're very welcome, sweetie." The woman looked at Richard with eyes that saw too much. "I'm Gloria. I clean rooms at the Sunset. I've seen you and your little girl there." "I'm Richard. This is Sophie. Nice to properly meet you both." Gloria walked with them out of the store. In the parking lot, Sophie carefully unwrapped her ice cream bar and took a small bite, closing her eyes like she was tasting something sacred. "Thank you," Richard said again. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Gloria said simply. "But sometimes doing something kind is its own reward. You take care of that sweet girl." She walked away before Richard could respond, heading back toward the motel across the street. Richard watched her go, this woman who worked a cleaning job and still had the generosity to buy ice cream for a stranger's child. He felt something shift inside him, some small crack in the wall of despair he had built around himself. Sophie finished her ice cream bar slowly, savoring every bite. When it was gone, she looked up at Richard with the first genuine smile he had seen from her in weeks. "That was the best ice cream ever, Daddy." "Yeah," Richard said, thinking about Gloria's kindness. "Yeah, it really was." The next morning, Richard woke to a knock on the motel room door. He opened it to find Gloria standing there with a cleaning cart, but she was not there to clean the room. She held a paper bag. "I made too much breakfast this morning," she said. "Thought you and Sophie might help me out by eating these extra biscuits." Richard knew she had not made too much breakfast. He knew these biscuits had been made specifically for them. But he also knew that refusing would insult her kindness, and he was learning that accepting help with grace was harder than he had ever imagined. "That's very thoughtful," he said. "Please, come in." Gloria set the bag on the small table. Inside were 4 homemade biscuits with butter and jam, still warm. Sophie woke up and saw the food, her eyes going wide. "Miss Gloria." "Good morning, honey. I hope you like strawberry jam." They ate together, Gloria sitting on the edge of the other bed while Richard and Sophie devoured the biscuits. It was the best food Richard had tasted in months. Real food, made with care, not the expired items from food banks or the dollar menu meals he usually managed to scrape together. "You work 3 jobs?" Richard asked, making conversation. "Sure do. Clean here at the motel mornings, work at the hospital cafeteria afternoons, and do evening cleaning at an office building downtown. My husband Frank works construction. Between us we make enough to get by." Gloria smiled, but Richard could see the tiredness in her eyes. "We raised 4 kids. They are all grown now, doing well. Got 6 grandkids." Richard felt ashamed. This woman who worked herself to exhaustion across 3 minimum wage jobs had spent her own money to help his daughter. Meanwhile, he had once spent more on a single watch than Gloria probably earned in 6 months, and he had not thought twice about it. "I used to be wealthy," Richard said quietly. "I lost everything. I'm not making excuses, but I want you to know this isn't who I am. Or it's not who I was." "I know who you are," Gloria said. "You're a father doing his best for his daughter. That's what matters." Over the next week, Gloria became a regular presence in their lives. She brought food every few days, always with an excuse about making too much or having extras. She never asked invasive questions about Richard's situation, never offered advice he did not request. She simply showed up with small kindnesses that made their difficult circumstances slightly more bearable. Sophie began drawing pictures for Gloria with the free crayons from a family shelter. Pictures of flowers and sunshine and people holding hands. Gloria taped every single drawing to her cleaning cart, displaying them proudly as she worked. Other motel residents noticed and asked about them. "These are from my friend Sophie," Gloria would say. "She's an artist." Richard found temporary work doing odd jobs he found posted at the library. 5 hours here, 3 hours there, barely enough to keep them in the motel and fed. But Gloria's regular contributions of food stretched his meager earnings further. He kept track in a small notebook, writing down every kindness, planning how he would repay her someday. One evening, Gloria knocked on the door with her husband Frank, a tall man with weathered hands and a gentle smile. They brought a box fan to help with the heat and a bag of Sophie's clothes that Gloria said her granddaughter had outgrown. "You don't have to do this," Richard said, feeling overwhelmed. "We know," Frank said, "but we want to." After they left, Richard sat on the bed with Sophie and cried for the first time since losing everything. Not tears of despair, but tears of gratitude for two people who barely had enough themselves but still found ways to give. Sophie hugged him tight. "Miss Gloria is nice," Sophie said. "I love her." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Beth Anderson had worked for Thomson Corporation for 8 years before the collapse. She had been Richard's executive assistant, managing his schedule and handling the endless details that came with running a billion-dollar company. When the scandal broke, she lost her job like everyone else. Unlike many of her co-workers, she did not blame Richard. She remembered the year her mother had cancer, how Richard had quietly continued paying her full salary even though she missed months of work. She remembered the employee whose house burned down, and how Richard had arranged temporary housing without being asked. She remembered the countless small kindnesses he had shown to people who worked for him, the way he knew everyone's names and asked about their families. Beth had found a new job quickly, working as an office manager for a small tech startup in Denver. It paid less than Thomson Corporation, but it was stable work. She had moved on with her life. But she often wondered what had happened to Richard and his daughter. One Saturday afternoon, Beth was shopping at a discount grocery store on the east side of Denver when she saw him. Richard Thompson, wearing a stained t-shirt and pushing a shopping cart with one broken wheel. He looked 20 years older than she remembered. He was carefully comparing prices on cans of beans, putting items back when they cost too much. Beth almost did not approach him, afraid it would embarrass him. But then she saw a little girl with him, thin and tired looking, and her heart broke. She walked over. "Mr. Thompson." Richard turned, and she watched recognition and shame flash across his face. "Beth. Hello. How are you?" It was a stupid question. She could see exactly how he was. "We're managing," Richard said quietly. "This is my daughter Sophie. Sophie, this is Beth. She used to work with Daddy." "Nice to meet you," Sophie said politely. Beth made small talk for a few minutes, keeping her voice light and normal, not mentioning how shocking it was to see her former boss shopping at a discount store. When they parted ways, Richard seemed relieved to escape. But Beth could not stop thinking about what she had seen. That evening, she started making phone calls. First to Michael Chen. "Wait, no, I can't use Chen. Let me think of another character." First to her former co-worker Jennifer Marks, who had been in accounting. Then to Paul Stevens, who had worked in IT. Then to 6 other former Thomson Corporation employees she had stayed in touch with. "I know we all lost our jobs when the company collapsed," Beth said on each call. "But remember how Mr. Thompson treated us? Remember how he gave bonuses when the company did well? Remember how he actually cared about us as people? Everyone remembered. Some were still angry about losing their jobs, but others recalled the good times. The company picnics where Richard had grilled hamburgers himself. The holiday parties where he had made sure every employee's child received a gift. The way he had fought to preserve as many jobs as possible even when the board pressured him to cut staff. I saw him at the grocery store, Beth continued. He's living in a motel with his little girl. I think he's barely getting by. What can we do? Jennifer asked. I'm not sure yet, but I think we should do something. Over the next week, Beth organized a group of 12 former Thomson Corporation employees who wanted to help. They started a private fundraising effort, each contributing what they could afford. Some gave $20, others gave $100. They set up a simple online fundraising page and shared it carefully with other former employees who had positive memories of working at the company. The response surprised Beth. Within 3 days, they had raised $4,000. Former employees from across the country contributed, many adding notes about how Richard had helped them during their time at the company. A middle manager in Arizona wrote about how Richard had personally called to congratulate him on his wedding. A receptionist in Texas described how Richard had visited her in the hospital when she had surgery. He was a good boss, people wrote. He didn't deserve what happened. He tried to do right by us. Beth tracked down the motel where Richard was staying through a former coworker who had seen him in the area. She did not tell Richard about the fundraising yet. She wanted to build up a meaningful amount first, enough to really make a difference. But knowing there was a plan in motion, knowing that Richard had not been forgotten, filled her with hope. She called Jennifer Marks one evening with an update. We up to $6,000 now. More people are contributing every day. That's wonderful, Jennifer said. But Beth, what's our end goal here? We give him money, and then what? Beth had been thinking about that. I think we need to help him get back on his feet. Not just a one-time payment, but something sustainable. Let me make some more calls. I have an idea. Do you believe people can change? Do you think kindness matters? Subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Jennifer Morrison had been a social worker for 12 years, and she thought she had seen every kind of family situation imaginable. Abuse cases, neglect cases, poverty cases, addiction cases. The job had made her cynical. Most parents, in her experience, put their own needs above their children's. Most families she worked with had multiple generations of dysfunction. So when she received a referral about a 7-year-old girl living in a motel with her father, she expected the worst. The report had come from a concerned teacher who had met Sophie at her free summer program for at-risk children. The teacher noted that Sophie was clean and polite, but appeared undernourished and wore ill-fitting donated clothes. Jennifer drove to the Sunset Motel on a Thursday afternoon. The building was run down, but not dangerous. The parking lot had a few families with children playing near the rooms. She knocked on room 14, where Richard and Sophie Thomson were supposedly staying. Richard answered the door looking wary. Jennifer showed her badge and explained she was there for a welfare check on Sophie. She watched Richard's face drain of color. Please don't take her away from me, Richard said immediately. I know we don't have much, but she's loved and cared for. Please. Mr. Thomson, I'm not here to take your daughter. I'm here to assess the situation and see if there are resources that might help your family. May I come in? The room was tiny but spotlessly clean. The beds were neatly made. Sophie's few possessions were organized carefully on the small dresser. There were children's drawings taped to the walls, bright pictures that brought some cheer to the dreary space. Sophie herself was sitting at the small table working on a coloring book. Jennifer interviewed Sophie gently while Richard waited outside, per protocol. Sophie was articulate and calm. She described her daily routine, her father's job searching efforts, the free summer program she attended. She talked about Miss Gloria who brought them food and was nice to her. Are you scared of your daddy? Jennifer asked. No, Sophie said, looking confused. Daddy takes care of me. He loves me. Does he ever hurt you? Never. Daddy would never hurt me. Jennifer could see the truth in the child's eyes. This was not an abuse case or a neglect case. This was a father trying desperately to care for his daughter in impossible circumstances and succeeding as much as anyone could. She called Richard back inside. "Mr. Thompson, I can see Sophie is well loved. But I'm concerned about your living situation and resources. I want to connect you with some programs that might help." Richard's relief was visible. "Anything. I'll do anything." Jennifer spent the next hour going through available resources. Food stamps, Medicaid for Sophie, job training programs through the county, housing assistance with a 6-month waiting list. She gave Richard applications and phone numbers, explaining each program carefully. As she was packing up her papers, there was a knock on the door. Gloria came in with her cleaning cart, then stopped when she saw Jennifer's official badge. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Jennifer said. "Are you Gloria?" "Yes, I work here at the motel. Sophie told me about you, about how you've been helping them." Gloria looked worried, like she thought she might be in trouble. "I just bring by some extra food sometimes. Nothing wrong with that, I hope." Jennifer smiled, feeling something warm in her chest. "There's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, I think what you're doing is wonderful." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Thompson, people like Gloria are part of a support system. That's important. I'm going to put in my report that Sophie is safe and loved, and that you have community support. I'll check in again in 30 days, but I'm not concerned about her welfare." After Jennifer left, Richard sat down heavily on the bed. Sophie climbed into his lap and hugged him. Gloria squeezed his shoulder. "See," Gloria said, "things are looking up. That social worker is going to help you get connected to programs. And Sophie's fine right where she is, with her daddy." Richard filled out the applications that evening while Sophie colored quietly beside him. The process was humiliating, admitting his poverty on official forms, providing documentation of his failure. But he thought about Gloria's kindness and Jennifer's genuine desire to help, and he found the strength to complete every page. 3 weeks later, they were approved for food assistance and Medicaid. The monthly food benefit was modest, but it meant Richard could stop choosing between feeding Sophie and paying for the room. It meant Sophie could have 3 meals a day instead of 1 or 2. It was not much, but it was something. It was progress. The job training program Jennifer had connected Richard with focused on resume building and interview skills for formerly successful professionals who had fallen on hard times. Richard attended classes twice a week at a community center in downtown Denver. He learned how to address the gap in his employment history honestly without dwelling on the scandal. He practiced interview answers with counselors who did not judge him for his past. One of the program coordinators connected Richard with a warehouse distribution center that was willing to hire people with complicated backgrounds. The pay was $12 an hour, far cry from his former salary, but it was honest work with regular hours. Richard started the following Monday, loading boxes onto trucks from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. The work was physically demanding. Richard's soft hands developed blisters that turned into calluses. His back ached every evening. But the regular paycheck meant security. It meant he could pay for the motel room without panic. It meant he could buy Sophie new shoes when her donated ones fell apart. Gloria's husband Frank heard about Richard's new job and offered him additional work on weekends. Frank's construction company needed general laborers for a new apartment complex being built across town. The weekend work paid $15 an hour and gave Richard a chance to learn basic construction skills. "You're a hard worker," Frank told Richard after the first Saturday. "You show up on time, you do what you're told, you don't complain. That matters in this business." With 2 income sources, Richard's financial situation stabilized. He opened a new bank account and started saving money. $5 here, $10 there. By the end of the first month, he had saved $200. It felt like a fortune. Sophie's life improved too. With Medicaid, Richard took her to a dentist for the first time in months. She had 2 cavities that needed filling, and the dentist gave them a toothbrush and toothpaste at no charge. Richard took her to a community health clinic where a kind doctor checked her overall health and prescribed vitamins. The free summer program where Sophie spent her days was run by Karen Sullivan, a white woman in her early 40s who had dedicated her life to helping at-risk children. Karen's community center offered meals, educational activities, and safe supervision for kids whose parents were working. Sophie thrived there, making friends with other children and participating in art projects and reading groups. Karen noticed how much Sophie had blossomed since Richard's employment had stabilized. The girl who had been quiet and withdrawn now laughed and played with other children. She participated eagerly in activities. Her drawings became more colorful and imaginative. "Your daughter is special," Karen told Richard one afternoon when he came to pick Sophie up. "She has real artistic talent. Have you thought about enrolling her in school for the fall?" "I want to," Richard said. "But I'm not sure I can manage the supplies and fees and everything." "Let me see what I can arrange," Karen said. "We have some scholarship programs for families in transition. Sophie shouldn't miss out on education because of temporary circumstances." Karen worked with Richard to complete enrollment paperwork for a nearby elementary school. She connected him with a program that provided free school supplies and backpacks for low-income students. She even arranged for Sophie to participate in free after-school care so Richard could continue working his full schedule. By August, Richard had saved $800. It was not much, but it represented hope. It represented the possibility that they could eventually move out of the motel and into a real apartment. It represented a future that was slowly becoming imaginable again. Gloria continued bringing food several times a week, though Richard could now afford to buy groceries. He tried to refuse, saying he was doing better and she should not have to help anymore. "This isn't charity," Gloria said firmly. "This is friendship. Friends help each other. You'd do the same for me if situations were reversed." Richard thought about that and realized she was right. He would help her if he could. Friendship was not transactional. It was not about keeping score. It was about caring for each other simply because that was what good people did. He started helping Gloria with small things in return. He fixed the broken handle on her cleaning cart using skills he had learned from Frank. He helped her carry heavy supplies from her car. He looked after her grandchildren one Saturday when she and Frank both had to work. The friendship became reciprocal, balanced not by money but by mutual care and respect. Michael Hayes had lost $3 million when Thomson Corporation collapsed. He had been one of the company's largest individual investors, believing in Richard Thompson's vision and business acumen. When the fraud was exposed, Michael's lawyers had joined the chorus of people suing Richard, trying to recover whatever assets remained. But unlike many investors who simply wanted revenge, Michael had followed the case closely. He had read every court document, every investigative report, every piece of evidence presented. What he discovered was that Richard truly had not known about the fraud. The chief financial officer had hidden the scheme carefully, creating false reports that even sophisticated auditors had believed. Richard had been guilty of trusting the wrong person and not asking enough hard questions, but he had not been guilty of the actual fraud. He had lost everything just like his investors had, maybe more. His entire life had been destroyed while the actual criminal was serving time in federal prison. Michael had made his fortune as an ethical investor, putting money into companies that prioritized sustainability and social responsibility. He had built his wealth slowly and carefully, avoiding schemes that promised unrealistic returns. The Thomson Corporation investment had been his one major mistake, and he had learned from it. Now, a year after the collapse, Michael's business was thriving again. He had recovered his losses through other investments. But he could not stop thinking about Richard Thompson, the man who had lost everything. Michael did some digging and discovered that Richard was working at a warehouse and living in a motel with his young daughter. One Saturday in September, Michael drove to the Sunset Motel. He found Richard washing his car in the parking lot, an old sedan that looked like it might fall apart at any moment. Sophie was helping, spraying water from a hose and laughing. "Richard Thompson," Michael said. Richard turned, and his face went pale when he recognized Michael. "Mr. Hayes. I'm sorry. I know I owe you money. I'm working on it. It might take a long time, but I will pay back what I can." "That's not why I'm here," Michael said. "Can we talk?" They sat at a picnic table, while Sophie continued playing with the hose. Richard looked terrified, like he expected Michael to attack him. Instead, Michael explained what he had learned from following the case. "You made mistakes," Michael said. "You trusted the wrong person. You didn't have enough oversight. But you didn't commit fraud. You lost everything too." "That doesn't excuse it," Richard said quietly. "People lost money because I failed them." True. But I've been thinking about what happens next. You're working a warehouse job and living in a motel. You're trying to rebuild. That takes courage. Richard did not feel courageous. He felt exhausted and ashamed. But he nodded. Michael leaned forward. I run an investment firm that focuses on ethical business practices. One of my biggest challenges is helping clients understand the difference between aggressive growth and unsustainable practices. I need someone who can speak to business leaders about what happens when companies cut corners, when executives don't ask hard questions, when growth becomes more important than sustainability. I don't understand, Richard said. I want to hire you as a consultant. You would speak to our clients and potential clients about business ethics. You would share your story, your mistakes, and what you learned. You would help other executives avoid the failures that destroyed your company. Richard stared at him. Why would you help me? Because I believe in second chances. Because I think you have valuable knowledge that could help others. Because punishment without redemption is just cruelty. Michael pulled out a business card. Think about it. The consulting work would be part-time initially, maybe 10 hours a week. We'd pay you $50 an hour. If it works out, we could expand the role. $50 an hour. 10 hours a week. That was $500, more than Richard made in an entire week at the warehouse. It was a lifeline he had not dared to imagine. I'll do it, Richard said. Yes. Absolutely yes. They shook hands. Michael gave Richard an assignment to prepare a presentation about his experiences for a group of business students at the University of Denver. The presentation was scheduled for 3 weeks away, giving Richard time to organize his thoughts and practice his delivery. After Michael left, Richard sat at the picnic table for a long time, watching Sophie play. Gloria came by with her cleaning cart and noticed his stunned expression. Good news? She asked. I think my luck is finally changing, Richard said. Richard's first presentation at the University of Denver was to a group of 30 MBA students taking a business ethics course. He wore a borrowed suit that Frank had helped him find at a thrift store. His hands shook as he stood in front of the classroom, but once he started talking, the words flowed naturally. He told them about building Thomson Corporation from nothing. He told them about the pressure to deliver returns, the temptation to overlook warning signs, the fatal mistake of trusting without verifying. He told them about the collapse, the lawsuits, the loss of everything. He told them about living in a motel with his daughter and not being able to afford ice cream. The students listened with intense focus. When Richard finished, there was a long silence. Then one student raised her hand. What would you have done differently? She asked. Everything, Richard said simply. I would have asked harder questions. I would have demanded more transparency. I would have prioritized sustainability over growth. I would have remembered that real people's lives depended on my decisions. Another student asked, do you think you'll ever recover financially? Maybe not to the level I had before. But I'm learning that recovery is not just about money. It's about becoming a better person. It's about learning from mistakes. It's about finding purpose in helping others avoid the same failures. The presentation earned him strong evaluations. Michael Hayes was impressed and immediately booked Richard for 3 more speaking engagements. The consulting work grew steadily. Richard spoke to business leaders, college students, professional organizations. He became known for his honest, raw presentations about the real cost of ethical failures. By November, Richard's consulting income had grown to match his warehouse wages. He was working 7 days a week between both jobs, but the exhaustion was different now. He was working toward something, building toward a future, not just surviving day to day. Meanwhile, Beth Anderson's fundraising effort had continued quietly. The group of former Thomson Corporation employees had raised $15,000 over 6 months. Beth finally contacted Richard to tell him about it. We want to give you this money, Beth said when she met with Richard at a coffee shop. Not as a loan, as a gift from people who remember the good things you did for us. Richard was overwhelmed. I can't accept this. You all lost your jobs because of me. We lost our jobs because of fraud that you didn't commit, Beth corrected. And we all employed again now. This money represents gratitude for the years you treated us well. Please take it. Richard thought about Gloria's words about accepting help with grace. He thought about how refusing this gift would insult the generosity of people who wanted to help him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I want to use this money to help others. Would your group be willing to help me start a foundation?" Beth smiled. "I think we'd like that very much." They formed the Second Chance Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping families in crisis. Richard used his consulting experience and his personal story to attract donors and volunteers. The foundation's mission was simple: provide immediate assistance to families facing unexpected hardship, helping them stabilize and rebuild. The foundation's first client was a single mother whose apartment had been destroyed in a fire. They provided her with temporary housing, clothing, and job search support. The second client was a veteran with PTSD who had lost his job and was living in his car. They connected him with mental health services and job training. Gloria and Frank joined the foundation's board of directors. Beth became the volunteer coordinator. Karen Sullivan from the community center partnered with them to identify families in need. The foundation grew organically, powered by people who believed in second chances and practical help. By December, they had helped 12 families. It was not a huge number, but it was 12 families whose lives were changed by unexpected kindness. It was 12 families who received the help that Richard and Sophie had received when they needed it most. The foundation's success caught the attention of local media. A Denver news station did a feature story about Richard's fall and redemption, focusing on how he had turned personal tragedy into an opportunity to help others. The story went viral on social media, bringing in donations from across the country. People connected with Richard's honesty about his mistakes. They appreciated that he did not make excuses or blame others. They respected that he was using his second chance to give others the same opportunity. Within a month, the foundation's bank account grew from $15,000 to nearly $100,000. With more resources, Richard expanded the foundation's programs. They created an emergency fund for families facing eviction. They partnered with local businesses to provide job training and placement. They opened a food pantry at Karen's community center. The work grew beyond what Richard could manage with his consulting and warehouse jobs. "You need to do this full-time," Michael Hayes told him. "The foundation is too important. You're too good at this. Let the warehouse job go and focus on helping families." It was scary to leave the security of regular employment, but Richard knew Michael was right. He resigned from the warehouse job with gratitude for the opportunity they had given him. He increased his consulting work slightly to maintain some personal income, but dedicated most of his time to the foundation. The foundation needed staff. Richard knew exactly who he wanted to hire first. "Gloria," he said when he visited her at the motel one afternoon, "I want you to be our operations director. I need someone who understands what it's like to work hard for everything, someone who knows how to stretch a dollar, someone who genuinely cares about helping people. The salary is $40,000 a year, with health benefits." Gloria stared at him in shock. "Richard, I clean motel rooms. I've never run anything." "You've run a household on limited income, while working 3 jobs and still finding time to help others. You've demonstrated more operational excellence than most executives I know. Will you do it?" Gloria accepted, tears streaming down her face. 2 weeks later, Frank joined as facilities manager, overseeing the foundation's food pantry and donated goods warehouse. His construction background made him perfect for managing inventory and logistics. Beth Anderson left her job at the tech startup to become the foundation's volunteer coordinator at a slightly lower salary than she had been making. "This is more important," she said simply. Karen Sullivan remained at the community center, but worked closely with the foundation to identify families in need and coordinate services. The partnership between the two organizations created a comprehensive support system for struggling families in Denver. By February, the foundation was operating at full capacity. They helped 23 families in that month alone. They provided rent assistance to prevent evictions. They paid utility bills to keep lights and heat on. They bought groceries for families who could not afford food. They connected people with job training, healthcare, and legal services. Every family that received help was asked to pay it forward when they could, either by volunteering with the foundation or by helping another family in need. The ripple effect of kindness spread through the community. Richard and Sophie moved out of the Sunset Motel in March into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. Sophie enrolled in a good school where she flourished academically and socially. Her teachers noted her compassion for other students, her willingness to share, her kindness to children who were struggling. She learned those things from watching you, Gloria told Richard. She learned that kindness matters, that helping others is important, that people deserve second chances. Richard thought back to that terrible day in the convenience store when he could not afford to buy his daughter ice cream. He thought about Gloria's simple act of generosity and how it had changed everything. One ice cream cone had led to friendship. Friendship had led to community support. Community support had led to opportunity. Opportunity had led to purpose. He was not a billionaire anymore. He never would be again. But he was something better. He was a man who understood the value of kindness, the power of second chances, and the importance of helping others. He was a father raising a compassionate daughter. He was a leader building something meaningful. The Second Chance Foundation's first anniversary celebration was held at Karen's Community Center in April. Over 200 people attended, including families the foundation had helped, volunteers, donors, and community partners. Sophie helped decorate the room with colorful banners and balloons, bringing the artistic flair she had developed over the past year. Richard stood at the front of the room to give a speech, but before he could start, Beth Anderson asked him to wait. "We have something special planned first," she said. Gloria was brought to the front of the room, while Sophie carried a large framed picture. It was a collage of all the drawings Sophie had created for Gloria over the past year, professionally mounted and matted. In the center was a new drawing Sophie had made specifically for this occasion. It showed 2 figures holding hands, one tall and one small, with the words "Thank you, Miss Gloria" written in careful letters. "This foundation exists because of one simple act of kindness," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Gloria spent her own money to buy ice cream for a little girl she barely knew. She could have walked past us that day. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she chose compassion. She chose to help. That choice changed our lives." The room erupted in applause. Gloria wiped tears from her eyes as Sophie hugged her tightly. Richard continued his speech, sharing statistics about the foundation's impact. They had helped 97 families over the past year. They had prevented 42 evictions. They had provided job training to 63 people, with 41 finding permanent employment. They had distributed over 30,000 pounds of food through their pantry. But more important than the numbers were the stories. The single mother whose apartment had burned down was now working as a medical assistant and saving to buy a house. The veteran with PTSD had found treatment and was working as a counselor helping other veterans. A family who had been living in their car after a medical bankruptcy was now in stable housing with the parents both employed. Each family that had been helped was now helping others, creating an exponential effect of kindness throughout the community. "But we're not stopping here," Richard announced. "I'm excited to share that we've received funding to expand the Second Chance Foundation to 3 more cities. We'll be opening offices in Nashville, Austin, and Portland by the end of the year. We're going to help thousands more families find their way back from crisis." The expansion would require more staff, more volunteers, more resources. But Richard had learned that when you start with kindness and genuine desire to help, the resources follow. People want to be part of something good. They want to make a difference. They want to believe that compassion matters. After the celebration, Richard and Sophie drove home to their modest apartment. Sophie chatted about the party, about the friends she had made, about how happy Miss Gloria had looked. "Daddy," Sophie said as Richard tucked her into bed, "do you remember when we lived at the motel and you couldn't buy me ice cream?" "I remember, sweetheart. I'm glad Miss Gloria bought it for me. But I'm more glad that she became our friend." "Me too, Sophie. Me too." Richard stood in the doorway of Sophie's room for a long time after she fell asleep, watching her peaceful face in the soft glow of her nightlight. He thought about everything they had been through, everything they had lost, and everything they had gained. He had lost his wealth, his status, his reputation. He had lived through humiliation and poverty and despair. But he had gained wisdom, empathy, and purpose. He had learned that kindness was more valuable than money. He had learned that redemption was possible. He had learned that second chances were real. Most importantly, he had learned that the measure of a person was not how high they climbed but how they treated others when they fell. Gloria had shown him that truth when she bought ice cream for a stranger's child. Now he spent every day trying to show others that same truth. The Second Chance Foundation was just beginning. There were thousands of families who needed help, thousands of opportunities to extend compassion, thousands of chances to pay forward the kindness that had saved him and Sophie. The work would be hard. It would be endless. But it would be meaningful. Richard walked to his own bedroom and looked out the window at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, another family was facing crisis. Another parent was counting pennies and wondering how to provide for their children. Another person was losing hope. But tomorrow, the Second Chance Foundation would be there. They would offer help without judgment. They would provide resources without strings attached. They would extend kindness without expecting anything in return. They would give other families what Gloria had given them, a second chance. And it all started with one ice cream cone on a hot summer day, bought by a woman who worked 3 jobs but still had room in her heart for compassion. One small act of kindness had created ripples that spread farther than anyone could have imagined. Richard closed his eyes and said a quiet prayer of gratitude for Gloria, for Beth, for Michael, for Karen, for Frank, for Jennifer, and for everyone who had chosen kindness when they could have chosen indifference. Tomorrow he would wake up and continue the work. He would help more families. He would spread more kindness. He would honor the gift he had been given. The story of Richard and Sophie Thompson was a story of loss and redemption, of fall and rise, of despair and hope. But most of all, it was a story about the power of unexpected kindness and the courage to accept help when it was offered. It was a story that proved second chances were real, that people could change, and that love and compassion would always lead the way forward.